We're so glad to be here again, guys. You know, it's always, when someone asks you to do something like this, it's not like we just jump in and say, oh, yeah, that'll be great. You think, oh, wow, okay, we'll put ourselves out there, we'll have to prepare, and, we're always made so welcome when we're here. But our hope is that that God can speak through us today to you. You know, we're not... the thing's on trust today, and by no means have Alyssa and I written the book on trust. We're more sharing from a place of that this is where we're at and this is what we're journeying together. And hopefully it just, by us sharing and giving Jonathan a break for a week and coming in here with you guys, that it can be a blessing and that we can start a conversation together about what trust is, how trust plays out. So where we're going with this today is Alyssa's been very willing to jump in and she's going to do some sharing as well, which is going to be great. And what we want to do is we'll just sort of set the scene for you guys from our context. And then Jonathan's been filling me in a bit about your context too, so we want to make it relevant to you, where we're going with today. So Alyssa and I will share a couple of stories, and then we'll kind of dive into the meat of the sandwich. We're going to look into the Bible, a couple of key characters, look at the Old Testament, New Testament, and then we'll try and make it practical for you. We'll look at some ways that we can make that work. And as you can see, I brought some toys with me today. So I want to finish and share a song with you. That's something that I love to do, and I love music, and I've spent a lot of my life playing music, and if that can be a blessing to you, today I've got a song that I think will really dovetail in nicely to finish up. So thanks for listening, and off we go. So Trust in Action is our title for today. I just want to start with a bit of a story because, quite a few years ago, it was shortly after I finished school, I went overseas to play music, and I worked with different bands and things travelling around. And at one point in time, I was working with a group in Europe, and the summer had finished, and I was on my way back to Canada to work with another group. And I was in this transition time. One of my best mates was living in Ireland. He was in Dublin. And I thought I'd pop over to see him. Now, I had no money at all. So we're basically playing at these music festivals, and one group would just cover our expenses, and then I'd pack up my backpack and my guitar and my didgeridoo and my hand drums, and we'd try and get to the next place. And I stayed with my mate on his floor in this little tiny share house in Dublin, and I'd go into Grafton Street. If anyone's been to Dublin, it's like the main mall area, and I'd stand there with all the other buskers, and I'd have my didgeridoo and my guitar, and I'd sing songs till I got enough money to catch the bus home and then buy some more food. So it was extremely meager, living by, okay, God, what are we going to need today? And where I'm getting at is I needed to leave. I needed to get back to Canada. And I'd come from Canada. I booked the cheapest possible flights, and they were going out of Belfast. So I had to cross over into Northern Ireland, and I said goodbye to my mate. I got on this bus, and we got up to Northern Ireland, and I got out to the airport with all my stuff, I'm over baggage and all this thing. I had just enough money for the bus ticket, and I get there, and then I go to check in, and they say, "Oh, you're at the wrong airport." And that's a bit Scottish, but you get the idea. And I was like, "What?" They go, "Oh, there's two in Dublin. There's two in Belfast." I'm like, "Oh no, okay. How long do I have?" And they're like, "No, you'll be right. Just you head out to the main area there. There's another bus. Look for this number. Jump on that bus, and you might be able to make it." I was like, okay. So I load up my backpack. My mate who used to travel with me a bit, he said every time I put the backpack on, it looked like my eyes were going to fall out of my head because it was full of drums, and also I put my backpack on. I carry my didgeridoo out of there. I got my guitar. I go in the foyer, and then I look in my pockets, and I go to get on the bus, and the guy goes, "Oh, you don't have enough money, mate." And I'm like, "Oh no. Oh, how long do we have?" He's like, "Oh, I'm going in 10 minutes." I was like, "Right." So I dumped everything down. I'm searching under all the chairs in the bus terminal, just going, "Oh, please, God, I need to make this flight. Like, I can't book another one. And I've got to make it back to Toronto." And I'm looking and I find a couple of coins, and I get on. And the problem is we've gone from euros in Ireland, and now we're using pounds. And so I'm trying to make sense of it, and I'm going to the guy, I've got some euros, and he's like, "You need pounds, mate." When I finally got back on the bus, and then this person behind me goes, "Oh, do you want me to give you some?" And I was like, "Oh, thank you. Yes, please." It was like, 50 pence or whatever, extra. And I got on the bus. I got there. I made it into the airport. And then I'm thinking, how am I going to get through the excess baggage? Anyway, long story short, I get there. The person just sort of looks at all my stuff and they go to weigh it, but they left it half on the ground. And so I got through and it's on the conveyor belt and I'm just like, yes. And I get in there and then I'm like, I made it. I'm at the gate and I'm starving. I'm like, I have nothing to eat. And I don't have any, and so I found my euros I had left and I waited in the queue and then I got there and the same thing happened. It's like I'd miscalculated or something and the person behind bought me a sandwich. And so I'm sitting there and I'm flying back and I had this euphoric feeling of I've just been wrapped and taken care of through all these obstacles. And I was like, that's it. I've seen this over and over traveling. And I'm like, my new motto is everything always works out. So I was like, right, everything always works out. And I got back to Australia and I put it to the test a bunch of times. I'd just show up places and go, you know what? I'm just going to find what I need and God's going to provide. And now it's like 15 years later and I'm thinking, does that still ring true? We've been through a bit of a rough trot this year. And Alyssa's going to share a little bit about that. But you're going, what? Back then it was pretty simple. I just had a backpack and I just needed some money and some food. Now we're dealing with, selling more mortgages and we've got kids and you wake up at night thinking, are they okay? Are they sick? Are they, what's happening? And you're trying to think, where are we going to live and what are we going to do? And am I going to have enough work? And all these sorts of things. And then your dad gets cancer and he's okay, but then your uncle gets cancer and he dies. We all have stories like this. You think, does that work out? Does all of this work out? Where does trust fit in and how does all that happen? So Alyssa's going to jump in and tell a bit of a story of where we're at and what we've got up to. What's our end time here, just so we don't go for too long? 3 o'clock. We won't. Here's Alyssa.
Just jump over. The kids will be going crazy. Am I using this microphone? Okay. Set up. Hello. So I've been hiding in the corner over there in the really comfy beanbags. I haven't sat on a beanbag for ages. So where the idea of what we're talking about today came from, for us, really just came up in the last couple of weeks. So, obviously Jono, as a travelling musician, we didn't start off in our marriage, we weren't, particularly rich. We've always felt very blessed, but we've never felt, particularly money rich or anything like that. But we've always been really well taken care of. And we've had some serious health issues. We've had some really big financial stuff throughout our 11 years of marriage. We've had some really big challenges, which is life. That's what tends to happen. But due to circumstances that we chose, like having kids really close together and me not going back to work, or whether that was sickness, the long story short is that we don't own a family home. And for many years during our marriage, we've really just been like, well, that's okay. God provides, and we're blessed. We'll always have a roof over our head. We actually live underneath Jono's parents, and he went through really hard times. Have been just blessed, and so we're always going to be extremely grateful for that and our situation. But I think last year, towards the end of the year, there was sort of this little bit of an opening up of maybe we might be able to actually get something. And again, we don't have to. We don't have to live that story. That doesn't have to be our story, but maybe we could. And there was a sense of a little bit of excitement that might actually be able to happen for us. And then just about a month ago, there was a block of land that came up that we've always looked at. So it's along the road that we currently live on, and it's exactly where we want to live, and it's opposite Jono's parents. It's a beautiful, sunny little block of land, and we could just sort of see our lives there being like, oh, we could raise our kids there, and it's really central in the town, and we really, really love people, and we could see people dropping in all the time because it was such a central location. And so we kind of had this thing, and the finances were looking like it might actually miraculously happen. And so all this sort of stuff was lining up, and we're like, wow, this is amazing. And so the day that the final offers were going in and all of that sort of stuff, I was, for the first time, I've gone back to work a couple of days a week this year just for term 1, and I was listening to a devotion in the morning. It's at a Christian school, and it was actually Summer's teacher, and he was talking, and he was sharing about a time as a teacher when he'd had a really incredible miracle happen with one of his students. And so he was just sharing on miracles and saying, I feel like there's going to be people, it's quite a large staff, and he was saying, I think there's going to be people in this room right now that need a miracle, that are praying for a miracle to happen. And I was sitting there going, yeah, like it would be a miracle if we are the ones that actually end up with this block of land in the current climate of the housing market. It would be a miracle. And so he was sharing on that, and I just had this real sense of excitement that maybe this was a sign. It happened to also be the last day that I was teaching for the term at the school, and so the staff had all signed a card for me to say thanks for coming in at short notice this term. And while I was rushing about getting, I teach PE, so I was getting PE equipment ready and stuff. For whatever reason, because I was definitely in a rush, I decided to have a quick look at that card. And again, it was Summer's teacher, and he'd said, thanks for coming in. I can't remember what he actually said, but at the bottom of it, he just said, he wrote the verse, Proverbs 3, verse 5. And it made me stop, and I was like, what's that verse? Like, I just sort of had this feeling that God was, really communing with me during the day. And so I actually stopped in my rush, and I was like, I need to look this verse up. And does anyone know that verse off the top of their head? Yeah, so trust in the Lord your God with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. And so I read that verse. Well done, by the way. God, I know, quick, oh yeah, got it. Well done. Got to use the technology where and so I was like, wow, is this, I got to just trust that this could actually happen, even though it doesn't necessarily make sense that it would all come together for us, trust in God. And I had this little inkling. I'm like, I think if I open up today's, because I read a daily devotional called Jesus Calling. I don't know if anyone else has ever come across that, but I've read that for a number of years every day. And I just had this thing, and again, I was in a rush. I was about to teach some preps. But I was like, I need to check that because I just have this absolute feeling that that's going to be the same verse. And so I opened it up, and of course, and I wasn't even surprised. There was that verse sitting there. Trust in the Lord your God with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. And so we went home with, got through the day. Jono had been camping, doing some filming in the Grampians, and it was all a bit complicated getting the final offers and everything in. We both got home. And we didn't get the house, or not the house, the land. And we're like, oh, okay. But we, it didn't make sense that we might get it. So wasn't that the solution, God? And, this was going to be a real miracle and all of that sort of stuff. And so we were left pretty deflated, more so than we had even realized. I think over the years we've really squashed that dream and that desire, being like, we're content, it's okay, we're blessed and we're grateful and it's fine. But sitting underneath that is this desire to have a home that we can raise our kids in and share with other people. But we've squashed it down. And I think that particular land not coming through just made us particularly deflated. But we had a gift from God. We had that verse. And so we'd made it make sense in our head that it's the perfect block for our family and for us. And it's come up at just the right time and it's all going to work out. But it didn't. And so we had this gift of this verse, trust in the Lord your God with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And so we sat with that for a week, and every time we kind of were like, we'd be like, no, but God gave us this gift on that day to help bring us through. And there was, I think on the Sunday night, so that was sort of on the Monday, I think on the Sunday night, after a week we were still feeling like, having to keep coming to that verse a lot. And we listened to a sermon, and, lo and behold, at the end of the sermon, a girl shared a brief testimony, and as the whole thing finished, that was the verse that came out again. And so we just went, okay, well, we have to hang on to this because God is speaking to us. And we were, just chatting in bed that night, and I said to Jono, I was like, well, I love this verse, and I love this gives us hope. God has given us hope in this verse, but how do you trust? What is trust physically? How do you practically trust God other than saying, God, I trust you, and I'll keep coming back to that verse. What do you actually do to trust God? And so we're wrestling with that, and even though we're doing our little sermon on that today, we're still wrestling with that big time. So we've got a couple of little things in our searching that we've come up with, but by no means have we got the answers. And so this was kind of where our sermon and our searching for what to talk about has come from. So I thought we'd just share that with you to begin with. And I'll pass back over to Jono now, if he's ready to tag in. Oh, you can have that too.
It's your turn to draw pictures of pandas. Great. Now, we're talking about trust, but a brief look into it. Often faith, trust, they become a bit interchangeable in the way people speak. I had a good little way of maybe differentiating between the two. It's like, we've got a chair here. Faith is that the chair is designed to hold my weight, and trust is actually sitting in it and it not and it not breaking and falling into this gentleman's lap. So a lot of the times in the Bible, faith comes up all the time. Faith is to be sure of what you hope for, certain of what you do not see. You know, Hebrews. It's essential and intrinsic. It's the core of Christian faith. Christian faith, there it is. Trust, faith. So we're going to talk about both today, but they're a bit intermingled. So I thought I'd just bring that up. In exploring how we might make this applicable to you guys, I hear you've been doing Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, and you've just gotten up to where? You were just telling me?
Yeah, 7. Early.
So you must have just finished Matthew 6, 25 to 34, right? The whole idea of do not worry. That's the title of that section in my Bible. Do not worry. Now, Jesus is there, this greatest sermon, that Jonathan's wanted to focus on for a while. And he's saying, don't worry. So trust me, right? Trust me. What does that look like? So we're going to just dive into the text a little bit to look into this. The key thing for me that stands out I want to highlight is, one of the verses here is, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. So we're looking at righteousness today. How does righteousness fit in with trust? Abraham here, he's known as the father of faith in the Bible. He's the beginning of God's people, the Israelites. If you look at Islam, also the beginning of the Ishmaelites. He's the one they often point to. Paul here talks about him being justified by faith. Justified, as simplistic terms might be like just as if I'd never sinned. So he's justified by his faith, his trust. This is Paul in Romans 4, talking about Abraham. This is where we're going to focus from the New Testament today. From verse 18, who wants to read for me? Does someone want to read for me? Someone read that? It's all too small. Let me read it out then. Against all hope, Abraham in hope believed, and so became the father of many nations. Just as it had been said to him, so shall your offspring be. Without weakening in his faith, he faced the fact that his body was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old. And Sarah's womb was also dead, yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, being fully persuaded that God had power to do what he promised. So God made a promise. Abraham stuck true to his promise. Abraham becomes Paul's example. Now, the context of this letter to the Romans, you're back in Rome. We've got a situation where just before this letter was written in 49 to 54 AD, Claudius, the emperor, he expelled all of the Jews, which also meant the Jewish Christians. So they were sort of bundled up with that. He kicked them all out of Rome because there was all these troubles happening with, well, who was this Jesus guy? What's happening here? And so Paul wrote this letter a few years later when it arrives after the Emperor Claudius was gone and the Jews started to come back. So they're having all these issues. Do the Christians who've been hanging out in Rome who are Gentiles, do they now need to be circumcised? That's what happened to Abraham with the promise. Do they need to be more like Jewish people? Like there's all these things. And so Paul writes into that. So this is key to understanding the righteousness bit here. The chapter is using Abraham as an example of God's righteousness manifest in humanity. So it was his choice to keep trusting that made him righteous. Paul was seeking to have unity, but I'm reading this and I'm thinking, was it really unwavering? Does anyone know the story of Abraham and Sarai and Abram back then and Sarai, and they're thinking, what happened? Sarai comes up with a great idea. What's her great idea, Russell? Hagar pops along. What happens?
There's a kid through Hagar, and yes, it's Abraham's child, but not Sarah's, as the promise was.
So God's given a promise, and he starts to think maybe in his own judgment, in his own strength, Sarai says, I've got a bit of an idea. Maybe we can solve this ourselves. And in the end, Hagar's relationship with Sarah breaks down. Hagar runs away. God says, I'll still look after you. It's fine. Then we have the Ishmaelites. There's conflict for generations and generations to come because of this choice back then. So is Paul telling fibs? Is he exaggerating? Is he like, what's happening here? This is what I'm thinking as I'm reading this, right? Here's the whole unwavering thing. So this is from Genesis 16. Abraham had made it many, many years. So he had a lot of faith. He had to wait for about 25 years for Isaac to be born. It wasn't physically possible. So he's waiting for a miraculous thing way after the time's done. Then we know that he has to give up his son, or he's asked to do that. And he goes through and follows through. And he's also way back left the region that he lived, because God had done a promise for him. I will make you nations. You'll be the father of many nations. Come, follow me, follow me. So he does. So he's got incredible faith, but he does probably mess up, like we all do, right? The word waver, the Bible's written in Koine Greek, the common language. Back then, when Paul was writing this letter, he would have put it in the Greek that most people would have been able to understand. Like English today, if we put it in English, most people will be able to get, it'll be accessible. I wanted to look at the word waver here. The Greek says not waver. So waver is the key word. Now, my Greek pronunciation is not awesome, but you can get the idea that it breaks into two parts. There's dia, which means to go back and forth. Go back and forth on something. And krino is to judge, or in this case, our own understanding. So you're going back and forth. What can I do here? What can I do? What can we work out? What can we work out? Oh, maybe I've got a servant. Maybe she can go into my husband. Maybe that'll work out. Now, often that same word, the way Strong's Concordance looks it up, is also translated into doubt. So you got that? Paul's saying he didn't have doubt. He didn't waver. This is his best example, but to me, it actually just shows that there's hope. And he's also highlighting how Jesus fits in. So he's saying, right, the father of the whole Jewish faith. He's writing to the Jews. He's also talking to the Gentiles. And he's saying, so the beginning of all this stuff, the most faith dude, the pin-up boy for dude. I got a poster on my wall with Abraham on it for faith. Yeah, he didn't quite get it right either. But he got a lot right. And it was that decision that he wanted to highlight is what brings the righteousness for the non-Jews. It happened before he was circumcised. So this is the stuff that's happening in Romans, right? Now, it leads into Jesus, that Jesus then becomes the unwavering, perfect fulfillment of God's righteousness in humanity. It's our belief, our faith, our trust in a God who is Jesus, unconditionally loving. Jesus, what is Jesus like? Unconditionally loving, self-sacrificing, and he's alive, right? Our belief in Jesus then becomes our righteousness. Our faith and trust is the righteousness that saves us. So this is a massive thing for our Christian belief. If you're wrestling with what it is to follow God, trust is an ongoing process. Trusting in Jesus, in many ways, when Jesus talks about the Sermon on the Mount, it's our righteousness. The righteousness comes from trusting Jesus, who is righteous. Okay, there's a lot of concepts here. Are you getting what I'm saying? Trust is really important. That's the cool thing, right? If you want to dive into the whole relationship between the Jews and the non-Jews, Paul's going all about that in Romans. It links in with the Sermon on the Mount, but I want you to get it. Trust is an ongoing thing. It's a verb. And it's righteousness not just for the future. Oh, I'm righteous, so I've got a ticket to heaven. It's saving us in today's context. Saving us from this. The back and forth. The doubt. The worry. Do not worry, Jesus says. How? How does that look, right? So this is the biblical framework, so that we're not just spitting out a bunch of verses to you guys. If you Google trust, there's a lot of verses about them. I want to give you some meat and some things. And so I'm going to get Alyssa now to jump up. Oh, one more thing, sorry. Before Alyssa jumps up, that same word, that diakrino, the Greek, it's also in James 1:6. So I'll read that out to you. But when you ask, you must believe and do not doubt, because the one who doubts, diakrino, is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed in the wind, the back and forth, the judging, our own understanding. All right? So you must believe, ask, and do not doubt. So I'm going to talk to, get Alyssa to jump up, talk about someone who did doubt. We talk about Abraham is the father of faith. We're going to talk about the leader of the church, the rock that the church was built on, Peter. He got a lot right too. He also didn't get it all right. So, Alyssa, thanks.
Thank you. Oops, here we go. So I find this story in the Bible really powerful. It's quite short, really, but there's so much in it. So I'll read the verse out that I'm talking about. So from Matthew 14, 30 to 31. And it's the story of when Jesus decides to have a bit of a stroll along the water, and he asks his friend Peter to join him having a little stroll along the water, which really, Jesus is asking the impossible of him. He is requiring utmost faith to step out and defy all physics and laws, that the laws of physics and gravity and everything that God has actually created within our world. He's asking Peter to step out and defy all of those as he joins him walking along the water. And so I think the first thing that's is important to recognise is that he actually did. So he started out and he did actually walk on the water. He stepped out and he trusted and had faith that water would stay firm beneath his feet. But then what we're going to have a little bit of a chat about now is what happens. So from verse 30 it says, "But when he saw the wind, he was afraid." So something distracted him, something without meaning to, blew him off course. And he began to sink and he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And so I think for me, the imagery of Peter actually sinking under the water and being overwhelmed by the circumstances around him, which is the ocean, it's actually a really powerful image for sometimes what can happen to us in our day-to-day lives. So I know for myself that at different times I can feel overwhelmed and feel like I'm actually just sinking down and feeling like I'm drowning. Okay, so whether that's just because, during lockdown with 3 kids in the house, and for me, like I've already alluded to, we really, really, really love people. And so it was quite hard not being able to see people. Even though we had each other, it was still hard not having that and just feeling like I can't, the house is trashed and the kids are, needing so much. And, just that sort of feeling of like, I'm drowning. Or sometimes it can be bigger things than that, not just, the little day-to-day moments, but it can be bigger things. So feeling whether that's, drowning in work or sickness or financial difficulty, this sense of overwhelmedness. And so I think it's a really powerful image of how we can actually feel when we lose sight and we lose trust, when we get blown off course. Something makes us feel afraid, that we can feel like we're sinking down. The amazing thing that I really like in this verse is that Peter actually, he refocuses. So he doesn't flounder about and, allow himself to continue sinking. He doesn't save himself. So he doesn't sort of discover, actually, if I tread water, I'm actually going to be okay and I can just lay, in the rescue position on my back and all will be well. He actually refocuses and he puts his trust back in Jesus. And so I think we often read this story and you're like, that's the story of when, Peter doubted and he sunk. But it's actually a story so much of when he did trust, but then he retrusts. And I think that that's really powerful because trust is a choice and trust is an action, and it's something that we need to continually renew. And so Peter renews his trust in Jesus, and as soon as he calls out, "Jesus, save me," Jesus reaches out his hand and pulls him up and pulls him back up out of his circumstances so that he can see again and see clearly. So from this story, I just want to then, leave you with 3 little ways that we can then practically trust. How can we use trust as an action rather than just a thing that we know we should do and we want to do? But how can we actually trust? How can we make this an action and not a passive thing? So I'm not talented enough to give a clever acronym or alliteration, so they don't all start with the same letter and they don't spell something out. But these are the things that I was able to come up with. So a huge thing is focus. So if we can focus on who our God is rather than on circumstances. So it's very easy, and we know that like the situation, again, this is just a little thing, the little blips that happen in your life. But it was very easy for Jono and I to go over and over and over of like, well, what happened and why did, and imagine if just that had been, and just go over the circumstances that had happened with that block of land. And it's so easy to focus on those things. But what we see particularly with Abraham is that he didn't focus on his circumstances. He didn't focus on the fact that his body was getting older and older and more frail each day, or that his wife was barren and also aging. He didn't focus on those things. Okay, we hear that he focused on who God is. We can see the same thing in Peter, that when he got afraid and he let go of trust, he sank. But as soon as he refocused on Jesus and put his trust in him, trust on a man who was standing on the water, trusting him to also then be able to carry his weight up and out of the water, he put his trust back in Jesus and stopped focusing on the circumstance, being like, no, that doesn't work. Like, that shouldn't actually happen. But he put his focus back on who Jesus was, and he was able to be lifted out. And so I think focus on God is a huge part of trust. Who is God? And if we can put our minds on him, then our circumstances so much of the time can appear so much smaller and often more meaningless. The second thing is to praise God always, and we learn this again from Abraham. So they say that, in the verse that Jono read out, it said he did not waver, but he praised God continuously, and he gave glory to God. And so a way that also helps us to focus is by praising God, by being grateful, so thanking God for the things that are in our lives, whether they're little things or big things, whatever we can manage to be thankful for. We praise him, who he is, what he has created. And through this, we also then can practice that same focus on God. And the final tool, which is not the final tool, because we're hoping that you guys, as you head out from this, that you guys also wrestle with this and come up with more things, and that we also continue to come up with more things. But the final tool that I'll leave you with today is to reach out to God. So we see that with Peter. Okay, when he was drowning, when he was sinking in his circumstances, he chose to reach out. Lord, save me. And as soon as he did, Jesus reached out and grabbed his hand. And so a practical way that we can reach out to God and refocus on God is something that I don't know who of you were at the Zoom service that Jono and I were part of last year, but there was a little exercise that I shared that's been incredibly helpful for me in a variety of different situations, but it's a practical, it's a physical and spiritual little exercise that you can do that helps reach out and submit to God to be a little bit more tangible. So you can just either listen and watch me, or if you want to join in, you can, but it's called Palms Up, Palms Down, and I didn't make this up, I read it from The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, and this was in his chapter on meditation. You girls can help do this with me. So what you do is if you hold your palms out, so I can only do one hand, can you guys put both your hands like this? That's good. And so what you can do then is visualize, so whatever it is that's making you feel like you're sinking or drowning, or you just can't feel that trust that you have with God, you hold that out in your hands and you visually hand that to God, okay? And as you're handing it to God, you empty your hands of that. So then you tip your hands the other way. Can you do that, girls? So you tip it out and hand it over to God. And you can sit with this for a long time, or you can do it really quickly, okay? But then you ask God for renewed trust and to fill your hands with his love, his peace, his trust, whatever it is that you are needing, and you turn your hands back over and you receive from God. And so I've found that, so again, like it can be a really, like just a moment in the day. Okay, I'm feeling, so I'm just going to, do my palms up, palms down, palms back up. Or it can be a really powerful prayer tool that you can use for longer periods of time if you've got the time and space to do that, to really, if you're looking for answers in prayer or for God's to speak to you, that's a really tangible tool that you can use. So I feel like that's a helpful one that just also supports focusing on God, praising God, and reaching out to him. So they're the 3 tools today that we're going to share with you. And the last thing to leave you with before Jono jumps up and wraps up and plays us a song is to just remember trust is action, okay? So we step out and we choose to trust. We step out and walk on the water. We call out to God. It's an action. And funnily enough, just last night when Jono was doing the final sermon notes and everything that putting this together, I was like, I haven't read the Jesus Calling devotional today. And I was like, I bet you it's got something about trust in it. And so I read that through, and there's just a really lovely little way for us to just, reaffirm that trust is an action. It's not a passive process. It's an action, and it's a thing that we choose to do with God. So this was just part of the devotional, and I'll read it out to you because I know that it's small. So it says, "Be still and know that I am God. There is both a passive and an active side to trusting me. So as you rest in my presence, focusing on me, I quietly build bonds of trust between us." And I love that picture, sitting with God, and as we are in his presence, he knits trust within us. But then, when you respond to the circumstances of your life with affirmations of trust, so Peter calling out, "Jesus, help me," you actively participate in this process. So he spiritually bolsters our trust within us, and then it's us that steps out and affirms that trust that he's placed within us. We choose trust, not because of who we are, but because of who God is. So I'll leave you with that and pass over to Jono. Don't need a mic.
Thanks, Alyssa. You can hear me now. I'm coming from over here. So as we mentioned at the start, this session we've done with you today, this talk, sermon, we want to see this as a facilitation, as a practice, an exploration, an exercise, a conversation starter for you as to what trust is for you and for you as a community. Because as we talked about with Paul's theology around faith and around trust, and Martin Luther goes crazy on this in the Reformation about how much our faith and our trust is a part of our righteousness in the moment and in our future, in our time to come. It's a huge part of our walk as followers of God, is this ongoing process. And we live in some pretty crazy times, You think about the stories you've shared, the prayer requests we've had. Trust is going to play a big role in all our lives moving forward. As you're reaching out further out of this wonderful community, there's going to be an element of trust. God's provision for this place, an element of trust. For this great pastor you've got, trust. I'll just sort of mention too, when Summer was here earlier, the feeling you talked about at the poker places, or Summer just randomly goes up to Alyssa and says, "I really like this church," because you made us feel welcome. This is the kids program. And so thank you for that. So as I wrap up here, I'd just like to, here's your homework and your takeaways. If you have a bit of a look at the screen here, as I've talked about, it's trust as individuals, trust as a community. So we've shared some of our stories about trust, just like you guys shared some of the ways God's working in your lives in the testimony time. What does that look like for you? And I think we all have valuable experience in this. We all have doubts, as did Abraham, as did Peter. We all need the fullness of Jesus to come in and meet those needs. So what does that look like for you? And in sharing that and thinking that for yourself, and also being willing to offer that to others within this community and beyond. I just want to ask a couple of questions. As I play this song, it's an opportunity for you to reflect And I'll explain how this song came about next. But as I play, I'd really like you to think about is there something that you need to trust with right now? Is there a burden on you? Is there an unknown? Jesus said, do not worry. Think about the lilies of the field, the way that Solomon clothed wasn't as good. Like, he will provide. But what does that look like for you? Is it opening your palms and then releasing? Is it praising God? Is it having some time just with him? Is it talking with others? Is that how you hear God's voice? Is it verbally processing and then praying together? And then what can you share about? What's going to be useful to those sitting around you? What's going to be useful as you go home and you talk with your family about what it is to trust? This isn't just a Christian principle. This is a truth. What it is to not worry in a world where our kids are diagnosed more and more with anxiety and all these issues. Our world is full of challenges. That's universal. And so is truth, and so is trust. And we see Jesus as the embodiment of that. So this song I want to play, I was chatting with Jonathan during the week about what we could share with you guys. I said, how are you guys going? He said, we're going well. We're stable. We've got a great group of people. We've got good teams. We feel a little bit like we're ready to go out of the harbour. We're sailing now. We're moving. And what does this mean? And where are we going to go? How are we going to trust God in this? And I just got these goosebumps because in that time I mentioned right at the beginning when I was travelling, I wrote a song about ships being out of the harbour, about trusting, about the wrestling of back and forth, about the doubt, the diakrina, like how do I work this out? And then going through the storms and then feeling this, it'll be okay. There will be calm waters again. And that in our trusting, that's where we can find the calm waters, even in the storm. And so I was just like, I'd love to share with you this song. And it's something that I want, when I write a song, I want the music to represent. So I brought all this stuff because I really like playing it all and it's fun. But to represent this relationship and expression of I'm thinking, I'm feeling, there's lots happening, there's it's busy, it's all moving around, and at the time where I was, this whole motto I had of everything always works out. I mean, if we revisit that, ultimately it does. Like if you have faith that even death is overcome. So even if we die, the worst thing you can think of. We've got a friend who's had multiple bouts of cancer. She's very young. It's horrible. It shouldn't happen. I interviewed her the other day for a podcast, a little while back for a podcast, and she openly says, I'm so glad I had cancer multiple times. I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, and she talks about how it's helped her. She started a not-for-profit. She's helping all these other people. It changed the whole way she lived. She went outward focused. I don't want to minimise the struggles and the storms we go through, but God is in the process of redemption and redeeming. And this whole motto, everything always works out, I'm like, yeah, it could be a cliche, and we don't want to dismiss it as that, but it is also a truth, and we want to be people who hold on to that and believe that. And that's what this song's about. So I was lying on the floor, wrestling with all this stuff, and thinking that I'm in a storm, and this is called Hearts on Sleeves. I want to be someone who wears my heart on my sleeve, who reaches out, who trusts, who doesn't shrink, someone who goes out of the harbour. And that's my prayer for your community, that you continue to talk to the neighbour next door and do coffee, that you put yourselves out there as we've done today. It's not the perfect sermon for you today, we understand that, but it's what we have to offer. And we just hope that God meets those holes that we have and plugs those and fills those and breathes life into that. And as I lie on the floor, an empty room is filled with thoughts. Gnawing on memories.
do I move with this? I'm a pocket full of change. I'm trying to find some sense in this. The world's asleep and I'm awake. And have I thought too much? And how do I feel? And ships are out of the harbor. The weather these stormy seas with hearts on slaves. Ships are out of the harbor. The weather these stormy seas with hearts on sleeves. And life should be full of spontaneous love, joyful expectancy of the uncertainty, uncertainty, uncertainty. And love and fear, is that all there is? Love and fear, the two colors that paint our world, our world. It's all gonna work out fine. Things will be revealed in time. And all part of this journey of mine. It's all gonna work out and it's all over now. The breeze is out of breath. We float on liquid glass. We're sailing on deep waters. And I'm the captain on the seesaw, this endless bobbing up and down. This world I am in, but I'm not of. And I've thought too much. It's time to move on. And ships are out of the harbor. The weather these stormy seas with hearts on sleeves. gather these dummy seas, yeah, with hearts on the sleeve. And I trust you. Oh, I trust in you.